Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am the host of the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I will be interviewing a number of amazing people and simply having a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a place for everyone to thrive in. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. You'll be able to catch up with all of the shows on iTunes, Spotify, and all of the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 3, with the title of Diversity Fatigue Through the Lens of a Middle-Aged White Guy. And I have the absolute honor and privilege to be joined by Scott MacArthur, no less. And I first met Scott at a Professional Speaking Association conference in 2018. And we hit it off straight away. Scott is a mentor, a speaker, a writer, and as he says, has worked with musical producers as a rock music producer, a TEDx speaker, a business consultant, an HR director, a zoo ambassador, research scientist, and today Scott focuses his writing and keynote speeches on the employee experience and the workplace of the future. This is all through his lens, experiences of science and technology. He has a particular interest in emergent technologies and cognitive diversity. Scott has worked at over 300 companies worldwide, wow, including PwC, Atos, Superdry, Willis, Deloitte, Specsavers, Capgemini, and the Chinese Olympic Authority. I bet they've got problems at the moment. So I asked Scott to describe his superpower, and he said, "I know how to read." So hello, Scott. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Nice to speak to you. How are you? You fine?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. Nice to see you.
So, yeah, I mean, we met a year and a bit ago at that PSA conference in, where was it? Coventry Way, wasn't it?
Coventry, yes. That was an interesting experience in itself, wasn't it?
Yeah, we kind of gravitated, kind of kindred, like-minded spirits.
Yeah. There was a bar.
With an emphasis on the spirits.
Yes. Yes, it was good. It was interesting because I think if I remember rightly, there was quite a lot of people knew each other, and you and I didn't really know many people there. I think
that's right.
And that's why we gravitated. But it was a good force of gravity. I'll never forget that. It was a good introduction. So, yeah.
It was, yeah. It's quite daunting when you go to these events for the first time on your own.
Yes,
and everybody seems to know each other, don't they? And it's And I think we looked after each other well.
I think we did. And I mean, I actually, if I'm absolutely honest, I'm not that, despite the fact I'm a public speaker these days, I feel quite uncomfortable in social environments like that. So, but for example, I dread dinner parties, and I can't stand, formal networking events. So it's, I think I can empathise with people who struggle with it.
So you kind of collect sort of self-professed introvert. Is that how you would describe yourself, or is it just?
I don't think I'm an introvert. I mean, I've done all the tests, and I'm not. You know that I'm not a great believer in the science is very poor behind most of these tests. But I guess I'm maybe an introverted extrovert. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I like my own company. I really like my own company, and I think it's partly why my superpower is reading books, because I love being in the company of Tolstoy or Carl Sagan, and I can do that by opening a book. And I can be quite difficult to get to know as well, because I put up this shield quite often that's not always particularly welcoming. So, I'm introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I don't really know, but
ambivert, I think, is the kind of
the middle. Yeah, I've read about that as well, but maybe I don't know. But I'm certainly I don't feel comfortable in social environments. And this is easy because I know you, and I could talk to you all day. But certainly in these environments, I feel quite uncomfortable. But the PSA, the Professional Speakers Association, does get easier, doesn't it? Once you get into it and you crack the veneer of the, you get to know these people. So
I think because we're all, as speakers, we're all opinionated. We all want to sell our ideas. We all have a certain stagecraft and presence about us. That's probably why it's daunting. And I think once you realise that you are the same ilk, if you like, and then people start finding us daunting now, don't they? And it's kind of,
they do.
It is. Yeah, I think it's just a case of breaking that ice and just jumping in. I think both feet first, isn't it?
No, it is. I mean, there's a Scottish saying, I don't know how well it translates, but it's we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. And what that basically says is we're all the same. You know, we're all from the same place. But sometimes you have to rediscover that you're just the same as everybody else. And in that environment, it can be quite difficult.
So I noticed you've done a couple of TEDx's over your lifetime. Yeah. I watched a few on the YouTube the other day, and if anyone's listening in, do look up Scott MacArthur's a couple of TEDx on YouTube. And if you tell us the titles and just tell us what that experience is like.
Well, I've done two. One was one of the biggest ones in Europe, which was TEDx Warwick. There's a couple of thousand people there. That, I have to say, Joe, that was quite a moment for me. I call it a threshold moment. You know, you have these experiences in your life that suddenly you go, whoa, and you see things differently. So at that TEDx, I spoke about why facts don't change people, and it's all about, you know, how important storytelling is and how important cognitive bias is, etc. And I was coming at that from my scientific and psychological training and past. But I'll tell you what the best it was. It wasn't the TEDx. I mean, that was daunting. I'd done lots of speaking at that point, but having 2,000 people in front of you and a red dot, you know, it was quite scary. But it was the meal afterwards that was actually the threshold moment, because they took us out to a really nice hotel to have dinner. And I'm sat there with, I'll just give you a few. There was a guy who's become a dear friend, who's one of the UK's leading AI experts. There was a guy who was a prison guard from California. There was a professor from Bristol who's one of the world's leading authorities on nanotechnology. She's an incredible creature. There was a woman there who was an opera singer, who was she was lead soprano in the Covent Garden Opera Company. Unbelievably different people. I mean, we were all sitting there giving each other feedback. And it was just like, it was incredible. You know, you wouldn't on the face of it think that an opera singer could tell somebody from a scientific background about, you know, how to improve his talk, but she really could. So that was a threshold moment. The second one I did was TEDx Telford, which is a much smaller, you know, 100 people, you know, much smaller experience. But the intimacy of that was terrific. And at that one, I did something that I never thought I would do. I spoke about my relationship with my grandfather, who was very, very dear to me. And the talk was called Who is Paying for Your Attention? And it was all about how the analog technologies, which is the future. I mean, analog is the next big thing when digital's coming to the end of its time, and analog's going to be next. And I was basically going back to the future. I was explaining to them why, you know, a letter I'd had from my grandfather, and I've got a box of them that are a foot deep, and I call it my grandfather's foot, which always cocks people's attention. But I could smell his aftershave. I could feel his writing and where he changed his mind. And there was all these people crying, you know, in the audience. It was wonderful. So that one was more, I guess it was slightly more about myself. You know, it was about my own story and telling it for the first time publicly, which was, you know, something I do as a speaker a lot, but that was a really intimate one. I mean, I really did. I mean, I was in tears. I came out off the stage and I was crying. You can't see that in the video, but I was crying. And so it was two different experiences, but I'll tell you what, that whole, and I know some people criticize TEDx and say there's too many of them now, and, you know, you don't get paid to do it. I think that's a load of nonsense. I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait to do the next one. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to stand up there and meet these incredible people. I mean, the one at Telford, there was, funny enough, there was a diversity expert. There was a marketing guru. There was a guy who is a design expert. There was a chap who was a global warming expert. You know, so there was
we've lost Scott.
Oh, hold on, something just happened.
He's back. Yeah. We've got a global warming expert and
an incredible array of different types of people. So it was a privilege, and it is a privilege to be associated with it. So bring on the next one.
Yeah, I've not done one yet. I have applied once. I didn't get accepted. I don't think I found my story. I need to find something unique, something that I've got a passion about, and crystallize it as a one-off.
Yes.
Whereas I think before, the mistake I made was I tried to just tell a general sort of like,
doesn't work.
It wasn't really. It's not repurposing an existing keynote. This is developing something specific for TEDx, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, I mean, the mistake I made, well, not a mistake, it was a learning thing. The first one, well, they both got good titles. Why facts don't change people. Are you paying attention, or who is paying for your attention? They're both easy to remember. They're both easy to say, and when people they are what I call generative. You immediately think, what's he going to be talking about? And I think that helps. So if you go in there, and some people do, and I don't think you should, but you go in there and you're selling a book or you're selling a product. I don't think that works. You just have to be yourself, and come up with something from your experience that really, really captures people. Actually, I'll tell you what you can speak about. I remember you telling me this. You said to me, and this is quite personal, so you might want to edit this out, Joe. But you said to me, one of my stories is about how I turned my wife into a lesbian.
Yes.
That would get 100,000 hits in a second on a TEDx. It would, because it's what's that about? It's got obviously sex. It's got all sorts of funny, and it's that sort of title that works as a TEDx. One of my mentees just now, she's the chief executive at Twycross Zoo, and I'm the zoo ambassador there. And she's just done one, and it was called "How to Be More Bonobo." And it's rocketed. It's got over 40,000 hits.
Wow!
Because it's just this unusual title, and folk go, "What's that about?" So there's an art to it, and I'm not saying I'm particularly good at it, but there's an art to it, and I think it is about having one simple thing that you talk about for 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, I don't half forgotten about that as a talk title. I've still got it in me. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the one I expand and go for. Yeah, and that's a. I'm not going to edit this out. I mean, for the benefit of people who are curious, it's about how I took part. My wife and I took part in a Channel 4 documentary, which documented my gender transition. We went from what people would label us as a heterosexual couple into a same gender couple, which so on national TV, she kind of became a lesbian, and that's kind of the base of the talk. But I would go into a lot more about the how we like to label people, how we feel more comfortable. We can put people in boxes, which is probably the basis of that talk. That people want to assume that those are our labels, and actually, we're not sure what our labels are. In fact, we don't bother with labels. We're just in a marriage. That's how we would describe ourselves.
Yes.
Of two people, and that's But no, that's probably a good point. What I need to do is I probably need to dig out some applications and go on a hunt for a TEDx opportunity somewhere. Yeah, good point.
I'd have a go at it. It's a great experience.
So I titled this when we talked about diversity fatigue through the lens of a middle-aged white guy. And the reason I suggest this is we hear this expression of white male pale style banded around. For me, it's a horrible expression. It's discriminatory. It's insulting, and doesn't have any place in my world. But also, I am aware there is diversity fatigue. We're always quoting McKinsey. We're always quoting these stats. We're throwing millions and millions globally on unconscious bias training. But I think we both know that it's not working. We're not moving. No. We're not causing a shift change in culture overnight or even at all. I think the latest stats on gender pay gap, we're looking at 2080 before we get even gender parity. And almost we're making it worse before we get there. So I'm also conscious that I speak to many men and they're starting to feel marginalized. They're not being involved in the conversation. So how do you feel as a man, as a white guy in that space, talking about diversity and cognitive diversity?
Right. Well, there's two parts to that. There's the professional part, which I spent 15 years working in the HR world. I was an HR director. I worked in British Gas. I worked in Scottish and Newcastle, quite male environments. But but I worked in what they used to call equal opportunities for 15 years. And I professionally feel excited actually about what's happening, because what you've currently got, and it's a bit like politics at the moment. There are interim moments. I remember I said that phrase, threshold moments, before. I take great pride in being involved in the 80s and the 90s and laying the foundation that's come to today. I think it has moved. If you'd gone to a gas engineer in the back of a van in the 1980s when I was at British Gas, they would have laughed at you. And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about me talking about equal opportunities. They would just laugh at you. What are you talking about, little girls? Well, they've got no role in this, blah, blah, blah. And now we're at a point where, it's everywhere. And it for me, it's an interim step, because it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be everywhere. It should be like electricity. It should just be there, but invisible. It shouldn't be something we have to talk about. That's the next phase. So professionally, I think it's amazing. I'm really excited about it. But personally, there are things that are getting in my wick. Labeling just drives me nuts. I hate that toxic masculinity phrase. I cannot stand it, because not just because it's stupid, but because we all know, well, you and I definitely know, that if you label somebody something, they take on that label. So it's completely counterintuitive. It's crazy. But as a bloke who looks for work in like the conference environment, and I now have this monster that I'm competing against, and it's called diversity. And it hurts my business right now. So it's not, so there's the professional side of me is quite comfortable with it. But in terms of opportunities for me, it's had a negative impact. So I have to balance that. And I mean, I'm obviously very happy about it in terms of the humanity side of it. But being in the interim phase is quite complex. And I think one of the these you and I hit off is we can have that sort of conversation. We can have. Sorry, I don't know what to say. What do you say, Joe? And you. One of your other phrases that could be another good TEDx title is, don't be a dick. That you've said that to me a million times, and I think that is really telling, because the environment's full of people on one side being offended. They become professional at being offended. And I think that's a horrible trait. And another side are just becoming more and more toxic because of the labelling. So actually, we've got to be really careful about how because we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, we're all just people trying to do our best. And I think you said in your introduction, helping people thrive. And that's ultimately where I think we're heading. So we're on a journey, and I think we're getting there. I think we're making real amazing progress. Amazing progress.
Yeah, there's some great points you've brought up there. And I find sometimes in the let's call it in the D&I space, the conversations that go on, you end up with these two polarized camps, the people who won't change and the people who demand change. And then there's often no room for the centrist view, where people come together, where people are able to have these, I don't know, conversations. Please help me understand this. I want to make things better. I want to make change. And I'd love you to help me type conversations. But we keep getting caught up with bad language. We throw in phobias and isms all the time. And let's be clear. There are some people who are toxic. There are people out there.
Yes,
and that's not males. That's not white people. That's just, there are toxic people on both sides of the argument that won't come together and have conversations. And I understand why people have entrenched views, having been oppressed, having been brought up in an environment where they have lived experience of being discriminated against and bullied and beaten up and violent. So I understand fully why people have protection views. But I think in a corporate world, we need to start coming together in this centrist ground, having open, honest conversations without fear of reprisal. If you get it wrong, if you're coming from a position of respect, from open heart, to listen, to learn, then we should embrace people like that. And I think that's the challenge we have at the moment. And but I think we still do detect some protectionist from the middle-aged white guys sometimes, because often we see initiatives that favour women, that favour ethnic minorities, that favour people of different faith. Almost to the point where we're saying, well, actually, if you're the white guy on this slate for this role, you stand less chance than a diversity candidate. And that's right. Pushback, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean that's why we formed. I'm part of a group called the Whole Man Academy, the Whole Man Academy, which is a group of guys. There's three of us, four of us mainly, who are looking at. Initially, it was to create a space for men to talk, because men aren't as good as others at speaking, and getting airing their feelings, talking about how they're coping with the label of things like toxic masculinity. And Tim's been really interesting, Joe. Our audience is men only, right? It's absolutely and deliberately and unashamedly men only. We've had our biggest audience is women, which is really interesting. We'll come back to that. And our second biggest audience is the bisexual and gay community and the trans community. And our third community is men. So we seem to be getting, this upside down response. And it's really interesting because I'm just watching it, what's going on, and on the whole, and I mean, I'm speaking in stereotypes, but on the whole, women are coming because they want their men to come. So they're saying, I'm going to buy John a ticket because John needs to talk to somebody about his feelings or about his biases, and we give them that environment, and that's great. The bi and gay and trans community seem to be, and this is a terrible stereotype, and I'd love to know what you think of this, but the impression we're getting is they're more in touch with their feelings, so they're coming anyway. I mean, half of our audience, literally in every event, is from that community. And then finally, we're getting very few, heterosexual men coming into that environment that want to actually talk about how they feel. They're just not coming. So it's a fascinating, as an experiment. It's fascinating, and we've had events where our last event had Rob Rinder, Judge Rinder from the television, that chap. He came, he spoke. Charlie King, who's from Towie, came along. I was speaking. We had some others, and we attracted 25 people. Yeah, whereas if I do a talk in London, over 100 people turn up if I'm doing an open thing in a pub. So I get more than the Whole Man Academy. And I think it's the label, it's the man bit that. So, I mean, we're not giving up because I think it's a really worthwhile and an important piece, particularly given if you look at the mental health part of it, so many young men killing themselves, that, we need to do something about it. We need to help. But it's a very interesting social experiment, Joe. I don't know what you think of it, but I think it's and it is partly in reaction to, everything's about, not me. What about me? And I think that's fair. That's a good, natural human reaction. I mean, I'm not sorry for that, not in the slightest.
No, I think so speaking from my own lens, my own perspective, and my own lived experience. Yeah. What you're saying about people who maybe LGBT.
Yeah.
I certainly went through a phase in my life where I had to think about me, who I was, my identity, relationships I had with other people, some of the things that in my life that I liked, disliked, places I want to move from and to. And when I considered my own gender transition, I had to think about collateral damage, who I was going to hurt, was it worth it, who am I? All this kind of stuff's going on in my head. So I probably did a lot of self-reflection, self-analysis about my own sense of self and identity. And I think many people who go through whatever transition that is in their life, whether they've had an illness, an incapacity, or they've had a major death in their family or close friends, we all start to then think about our own mortality and humanity, don't we, at that point?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite probably a true observation that in my previous life, I didn't do that as I was so focused on being the head of the family, earning income, delivering my job, hunter killer, protectionist type role, showing no weakness, and being there 100%, 24/7 to make sure I was delivering what I could at work, delivering what I could for the family. And then I realized that there was no fulfillment in that. It was just an empty life. I wasn't living to live. I was living to work. I was working, and I was working to live. And I as a result of my change, I rebalanced my entire life. That actually, I want to live my life. And while I live my life, I want to enjoy my downtime, and I want to enjoy what I do. And I was thinking about. I was out shopping in the local Tesco's at the weekend with my wife. And I remember we filled our trolley up and we got to the cashier. And I remember there's been times in my life where I dreaded having to pay the bill, thinking, will this card work? Have I got enough money? Can we pay the rent? Can we pay the mortgage? Can we do this? And I kept all that in my head without sharing it with my family. So I had all this pressure. I had cash flow issues with the business. I couldn't draw my monthly allowance that month because the business hadn't generated enough profit. I was paying the staff. I was doing credit control almost aggressively to get money in from clients, to pay people, to pay that. And then there's only a little bit left for me, sort of thing. And so I remember sort of 20 years of my life running a business, literally worrying about everybody. And no one ever. I never allowed myself to open up and say, well, how about me? I feel I can't cope anymore. I really am struggling.
Yes.
And I've certainly learned over the last 3 or 4 years a different way of being, which the gender transition has been a catalyst and a realization. And I'm not saying it's cause and effect, but this was obviously in my head a long time. But it has. I think it's interesting. You note that your target audience is your minority group.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, fascinating. Yes, but I mean, you've reminded me that one of the phrases that your audience might not have heard before is this phrase, cognitive diversity. And I think what you've just said, it really quite didactic there, because it reminded me of how I felt and how. I grew up in an ex-mining town in the roughest part of Scotland that you can imagine, very male-dominant, classic man getting the pay, going to the pub and the wife having to come down and pull him out the pub to get money to feed the kids, that environment. And I never met a person who was outwardly gay until I was in my 20s. I never met a person of colour until I was probably 19. It was all that environment. And to expect anyone to come out of that environment, male, female, not to be impacted by it is a completely ridiculous thing to expect. And I have been unfair on, like my father, for example, who on the face of it is a homophobic racist. However, he's on his journey. I'm on my journey. We have different journeys. He's never met anyone. He's never had the experience to question, where he was brought up. And it's why I often say to people, it's a bit trite, forgive me, but, seek first to understand before being understood. You've got to learn to ask questions, and not make judgments, because, Joe, you've got cognitive biases just as much as I have, as you know. And it's difficult. And that's why I like you, because you and I have these debates where we'll probably fall out, because we're like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's exactly how it should be. You should be able to have this different perspective. And again, one of the things I really value about our friendship is that it's cognitively diverse. We are not the same. And we shouldn't be the same, and it means, and this is why, again, I like in many ways, I quite like the Professional Speaking Association, because, again, you can be sitting there and you can be talking to someone who's an expert at doing training courses on cruise ships, and then you can be speaking to somebody who's an expert at speaking about rape, and then you can be speaking to somebody who's an expert on LinkedIn, and you have these cognitively diverse perspectives. And what that does, if you're willing to see it, what that does is it holds a mirror up to you and goes, do you know what, Joe, or do you know what, Scott, I don't agree with you. I see it differently. And that's where the magic is. I mean, David Whyte, one of my favorite poets, he says in one of his most beautiful poems, he says, start close in. Right? Start close in. And what he means is you've got to start with yourself. And the only way you can, there's multiple ways, but one of the main ways you can do it is by meeting people who are different to you. Because they look at you and they go, you're weird. Or, I don't agree with you. And that's like, oh, no one's ever said that to me before. And as long as you've got that soft front thing, you can actually, learn about yourself from a stranger. And that's terrific. Terrific. But most folk don't see it.
No, that's one of the things I try and talk about when I'm consulting or training or running workshops, is about the expression, go and drink in someone else's pub. If you keep drinking in your own pub, you meet the same people.
Exactly.
Go to a stranger's pub, you get involved with conversations, meet new people, expand your perspective, be likable, be approachable, be open, be vulnerable. And just get involved with conversation with different people. And I often encourage people to look at their circle of friendships, look at the people they know in their life. And without making it sound tokenistic, work out who you're not friends with, work out what people you don't have in your life. And then find a way of meeting people, either join community groups, volunteer, get out there and drink in other pubs or just meet different people in different groups. And then you expand your circle of friends.
Absolutely.
I think we've all got room at our table for more perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
As soon as we start narrowing our perspectives, we get a single view of the world. And then we have these polarized conversations where nobody can have the middle ground. It's almost like a medieval battle where people are standing on the hills with their archers firing at each other. You've got all the foot soldiers and the men on horses and their swords and things are getting slaughtered on the battlefield. And the generals just look at each other and go, that didn't work. Let's try some more arrows. And these battles are just last man standing things, aren't they? That no one wins. It's just who doesn't die.
Who doesn't die. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's what we are sometimes in these D&I conversations. It's the loudest voice, the biggest fist. Who's not going to die?
Absolutely right.
Pummel people into, I've given up arguing. I just can't take anymore. I'm out. My mental health won't take this. I'm out. And that's what the press, Twitter, and all these online stuff does now. It just spreads hate from the two hills with their arrows flying at each other.
Yes, absolutely. There's an app. Have you heard of Shaper?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, it's kind of Tinder without the sex. And what it talks about, and I'm not saying it's a great app. It's an okay app. But it's one of these swipey things. But it swipes on interestingness. And I quite like that. I don't even know if that's a word. But so, for example, you'll go on there and it'll have like people from a broad kirk, so you'll have scientists, poets, engineers, gardeners, whatever, cooks, and you can meet them. You can connect with them and get to know them. Now, it's not a great, I think you're better to get into something like the PSA than you are at a Shaper, but if you're sitting at home now and you're wondering how to meet people, it could be a way to start. I met a very interesting microbiologist. Now, that's not a million miles from me because I used to be in that game, but nevertheless, it's been 30 years since I've done it. So when I met her, it was really interesting, and it was just, and she is an interesting person, and that's a way to meet people. But because of the way society's changed, and the other thing that I think, and this, you mentioned it, community groups, we're not good at that anymore. I'm an atheist, and I don't find the God thing helpful, but I do find church helpful, oddly, because church, if you take away the God stuff, was a great place for people to come together, to dance, to sing, to talk, and we haven't replaced that in society because the church is dying, and that is a good thing. And from my perspective, sorry if you don't agree with that, but that's from my perspective a good thing. But we also, I think, have therefore left a gap. And there's a chap called Alain de Botton talks about this. He talks about the school of life, and he's trying to bring in the idea of almost secular churches where we get together from different backgrounds and help each other. And I think that's a real opportunity. Someone's going to do really well in that space, because I think as human beings, and certainly from a biological perspective, we need to be with other people. We're not meant to be on our own. We're not these wild cats that go around, or polar bears who spend most of their life walking around on their own and only come together for sex. Humans are not like that. We need the socialization around.
Well,
so
I've been to a few cities like that, but
yeah. So there are opportunities there, but again, we're at this threshold moment. We're not at we'll never get to the end. There's another beautiful piece of poetry that talks about we're on the pathless path. All these people talking about goals and all this stuff, and frankly, I think it's a lot of nonsense. because life isn't like that. You can only really see life in hindsight. It's very difficult to see it that way. But I think part of the pathless path is we need to be better at working to being together. We used to be quite good at it, but that was within a construct that's no longer appropriate. So we need to think of a new construct. And that's certainly not going to be going back the way, it's going to be going forward, but in a different way. Do I know the answer? No, I don't. But I do think there is an opportunity there, which is kind of what the Whole Man Academy is about, but it's not the answer. I know it's not the answer.
I think the new focus on things like mindfulness, being more introspective, providing people support to know that good enough is good enough, they are good enough. And a lot of stuff we're doing around mental health first aid is very powerful. And I think that's what we've lost. And I think what we need to do is help men embrace this, where women will naturally come together and talk about their feelings, talk about the stress of their life, talk about the man in their life, talk about all the issues they've got with each other in a safe, friendly environment. But men always come to, well, in my past experience, men come together looking for sort of one-upmanship, establishing their place in the pecking order, not showing weakness, or they'll be the brunt of the banter. You know, it's making sure you're not the weak person in the pack, isn't it? And it's so to burst into tears and say I'm really struggling, it's not a male thing. And I know 2 men that have committed suicide through financial pressures at work, business, and family, and their problems were solved immediately after their death by everyone pulling around the surviving partner and saying, we can help you and fix this. And their businesses were rescued, everyone was paid. So these solutions are always there. It's just you need to have a fuse in your head that says, help. Yes.
And even what you've just said is interesting, because in a tangential way, because if you go into the football dressing room is a classic metaphor, right? And it's a reality. And I've heard people saying it's awful, the language, the demeaning language about women, the demeaning language about, homosexuality and trans people is terrible. And actually, I used to agree with that. And I used to think, during my British Gas days, I got dragged into a job where I was looking after welfare, and I had to. There's a word we used to use. We don't use it as much now, but we used to have welfare officers, who would run events and all. And I had to look after these guys. And to be quite honest with you, Joe, they were disgusting. I was like, ugh. And I won't tell you. I'll tell you the story in the pub sometime. But there was some stuff that was really scary. But I've actually reframed that in my head now. I kind of see it as saying that's really bad is not right, because they obviously need it. There's something happening there that they need. The problem is there's not the next step. There's not the place for them to say, I've gone to the football environment and I get a lot out of that from my mates and I like that. And personally, I don't like it, but a lot of men clearly do. Millions of men clearly do. Yeah. So just to say that's rubbish and discount it, I don't think it's right. I think we say, okay, men need that environment. Let's understand that. And I don't understand it, but let's understand it. But then there's the next level, and this is what the Whole Man Academy is trying to do, is to say, okay, come along to one of our events. We'll talk about football, but we'll also talk about your feelings. We'll also talk about, and we're trying to be cute with it, because we'll talk about things like fashion. Men never talk about fashion. We'll talk about it with guests last month from a company called Shake Up, which is men's makeup, right? And when we started to talk about men's makeup, one of the guys said, put your hand up if you ever used your partner's makeup. Nearly every hand in the room went up, right? It was like, whoa, So a lot of this stuff is about getting us together, men, women, and, get us together and just get us talking about, how it feels, and how, and I'm not, please don't misunderstand me. I also have an issue with the victim culture. I think we've created, I work with school kids quite often, and you can see a lot of those kids have been programmed to be victims. And I don't think that's helpful either, so it's because it's so complicated. And it's kind of why I use poetry quite a lot, because poetry cuts through a lot of this, and things like, as a first step, stand close in, that it's like, what does that mean? And it gets you thinking rather than telling you this is how you've got to behave. Does that make sense, Joe? So
it does. I see a lot of people trying to repurpose the word victim. I'm not a victim. I was the target of. So victim is a very personal experience. Whereas if you can reframe that and say, I was the target of abuse, I was the target of someone's inappropriate behavior, it puts it back to the person that perpetrated it. So I think I agree completely. And I think we should stop using victim and saying, I was the target of.
Yes.
And yes, if you identify as a victim, that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But what we need to do is push it back to the people creating those scenarios in the first place.
Yeah, because they have the problem.
We need to address it, but it is. I mean, if you are the target of abuse or a target of discrimination through microaggressions, through socialization, through all the things, and it's a very privileged statement to say, well, I don't see that. I don't, man up, girl up, whatever that may be. It's a very privileged way of looking at life, and it's often incumbent on those with privilege to walk in their shoes, to understand their lived experience, and to try and think about what's going on in their life and what support you can give from that perspective, rather than it's like, don't just chuck money at something. Actually, some people would rather you embraced them and gave them more emotional support, not financial support.
Give them attention. Just give them some attention.
Belonging, value, worth, encouragement, praise, motivation goes a long way. And understanding what motivates people is something we do in the workplace all the time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what's the future then? What's the future for diversity initiatives, and how do we get men to have these conversations with each other, and to have conversations with women, and have conversations with people who are not like them in the workplace? How do we get them to come together?
Well, oh God, there's a PhD thesis on that question.
Magic bullet.
I mean, I don't. It's not going to be simple. I think, and that's trite, but it's true. I think there has to be some carrot and stick. So I think legislation has to change. I think the sort of with the world I used to live in, employment law has become far too much about quotas and not celebrating difference, but actually making more difference, which I think is just stupid. Looks at it the wrong way around.
Yeah.
I think there are real nitty-gritty things like maternity and how that's dealt with, and how careers are dealt with, how companies respond. But I think there is actually, and maybe this is more a hope. One of the things that is becoming more and more obvious to anyone who works in any number of companies, and I've worked in over 300 companies, and you start to see trends in all sorts of companies, and you start to see how they're morphing and changing and all the rest of it. Now, I don't buy into the millennials nonsense, and I don't buy into all this stuff. It's just silly. It's consultants creating
new labels. It's just new labels, new packaging things, new tribes. Yeah, we don't need it.
Yeah, and we don't need it at all. But what is happening? And this is I don't know, and I'm proud that I don't know, because I really don't know. If you look at the high street now, or even online, however you buy things, what are people looking for now? They're looking for things to be done for them as an individual. So it's personalization, individualization. So you get your Coke can with your name on it, or you get your dress done to measure in the shop with a scanner, or you get, all this is happening. And you think, okay, now it's been around for a long time, but it's only really getting traction now. And I mean, I've seen some of the emergent technologies in this space, which is going to make it easier and easier for companies to do things, bespoke products for everybody. So it used to be the driving force behind companies was something like, we used to call it scalable efficiency, right? So everybody had the same uniform, the same terms and conditions, collectively bargained with trade unions or staff associations, all of that stuff. That's now counter to what's happening in our lives. We're looking for individualism. We're looking for things that are for me, not for my tribe. So I think that, and I can't imagine a future where that isn't going to be just something that keeps going like that. I mean, it is exponential, and I'm using, a lot of folk use that without really understanding what that means. I mean, exponential means that if I take 30 steps from where I'm sitting right now, I'll be in my loo, which is just down there, Joe, right? 30 steps will get me to that loo. If I take 30 exponential steps, I'm on Mars, right?
Yeah.
So that's the
pounded.
pace.
It's the penny, doubling each penny on a chessboard.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly, with the grain of rice, the famous story. But
yeah.
if that's happening in society about individualization, there is only one thing that's going to mean, and that means that at work, we're going to turn around and we're going to say, I'm not accepting collective bargaining. I'm not accepting quotas. I'm not accepting, the collective model. Now, I know people have, you can say, my superpower's reading in one of the great writers in this space who I don't like, but was Ayn Rand, who was writing this in the 50s. And she was talking about individualization from the market being the ultimate supreme driving force. And I don't agree with that. But what I do agree with is where you look at it and you say, okay, what will that mean in the company? And it will just mean that if you want my skills, you're going to have to give me what I need for my life. It's why I don't believe in the work-life balance thing as well, because it's a false binary. It's just nonsense, but that's another talk. But for me, it's coming, and companies are not quite there yet. And I think that will be the beginning of making this a much easier process for us all, because it's why I am very cautious about things like psychometric testing, who say, oh, you're a yellow or a red or a pink. No, that's labeling. And if you get labeling, you know that can never be a good thing. There are 7 billion different personalities in the world, and we should celebrate that. And then people say to me, well, we can't do that, it'd be too expensive. No, the technology is taking us on that almost evolutionary journey where evolution usually takes millions of years, but not in this context. We can now do things efficiently, but at the individual level. And I think, Joe, that's our salvation, because it takes away all of this. So our conversation would just be Joe and Scott having a chat. It's. I tell you, you taught me something, right, about speaking actually, and you said, imagine how you would feel if the MC came on the stage and said, there was 2 types of people in the room. There was blue people and red people, and they walked in and they went, "Good morning, blue people and red people," and I was yellow. How would I feel, right? And you taught me to say, "Good morning, everyone." Do you remember that? I don't know if you remember even doing it, right?
That's what I do.
Tiny little change. And I thought, shit. And I didn't mean, when I went up and said, hello, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't mean to not include somebody, but I never realised that. Oh, sorry, I did realise. I just never thought about it. No, other way around. I'd never thought about it, so I never realised. And I think that sort of story that you tell, and I tell to a lesser extent, but will help people understand that we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. We're all the same, but we're actually all unique. And it's that we should be celebrating, and not things like in the HR world, recruiting to match corporate values. I mean, what a pile of nonsense. But people sell that and people go, oh, it's really important. It's actually killing your business.
Yeah.
Particularly in the next 10 years.
Well, that's what EVP, employer branding, that's what it's all about. Here's our visions and values. We want to use that as an excuse for cookie cuttering somebody else.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. It always was about discrimination, and it was deliberate, managed discrimination. And I get that, historically, if you're running an army, you need somebody that fits that mold. They need to be the same, But if you're running Marks and Spencer's or you're running Barclays Bank, you don't need that at all. I won't tell you the company name, but I remember joining a company, and just look at my CV, you can work it out. But their induction program, they actually told you where to get a haircut, what suit you were allowed to wear, what aftershave you had to buy. They actually told you what fucking umbrella you were allowed to buy, Joe. From what shop, right? And it was the same with the girls. So it was like, but they've stopped that now, which is good. But that is where we're coming from. And anyone who's naive, and I include you and I in this, who thinks we can change that overnight, well, they're just being naive. It's going to take generations. But to answer your question, I've been prattling on now about your question. It's such a good question. I think that change will be driven by a mixture of sensible legislation, but mainly about the culture we live in being based on individualization of products, and that will drive a demand and a requirement for companies to treat us as individuals, not as labelled groups.
It's a good thoughts there. I mean, personally, I think we're going to see the rise of the artisan. We're going to value the intellectual ability of an individual, and that fits into your individuality there.
Fits into it.
And organizations need to learn how to manage artisans and respect them and motivate them, and not box them into this corporate structure. We need more neural networks of employees and people. And don't think of employees, just think about it as team players in our neural network. And our artisans of the future are going to be gig workers. They're going to have a portfolio of careers. They're going to come together for small, discrete projects, maybe in an agile workforce, resourcing on demand. So again, we need to be able to value and motivate these people differently than just put them in this HR box. But I also think we also have increased pressure on mental health, because if a lot more people are going to work remotely, going to work in isolation, what outlet do people have for socialization, to share ideas, to have discussions, to have disagreements and agreements? And I think that's the danger in the future, where we end up just having conversations like we are now online with one-on-one, but we don't enrich that with a broader experience. I think that's maybe the challenge of the future, is to stop people feeling isolated, because as soon as we treat people like individuals, some of the tribe and team spirit disappears as well. So we all become gifted individuals and not team players. So those are definitely challenges as I see it.
Yeah, as far as the pathless path, we don't know where it's going to go. But I mean, another thing that I quite often have heated debates about is people telling me that, we have to think about development in a different way. It has to be done online. No, it doesn't. There is not a platform on the planet that does it well. They do it okay. Yeah. And it's only ever going to be okay because, you and I can have this conversation here, partly because we know each other, that helps. Yeah. But actually to get the real nitty gritty with somebody, you've got to be in the same room as them. You can't, replace it. And there used to be a phrase, and I don't like it, but it was a blended learning. You would look at things from different perspectives. And of course, we now know that learning styles is nonsense, and all this labeling stuff is it's all nonsense. But getting people together is dynamite. It's dynamite. And it goes right back to where you started this when you mentioned about community. Community is not online. You can help with online stuff, but the reality is, and a lot of people get a lot of good things out of the online stuff, but actually real communities like face-to-face, touching hands, etc.
And a blend. Blended learning, but we're not kinesthetic, audio, visual, etc., etc. We're more than that, but we all appreciate diversity of learning opportunities in two different ways.
Absolutely.
But storytelling is a very historic human way of communicating. We draw cave paintings. We tell each other stories. The Icelandics have the sagas of Snorri to talk about their culture, how things have evolved. Way before we could write and communicate and transmit, the human species developed through stories, which is, I guess, where a lot of religion came from, through the stories.
It was
kind of thing. But we love our stories. We go to the cinema to see a story. Entertainment is about taking us from a journey from here to here and making us feel great at the end of it, or sad or happy, getting an emotion. So, humans coming together and telling stories is very powerful. And I'm a great believer in that.
But they don't teach us how to tell stories.
No.
If you go I was working with a group the other week, 2 weeks ago, young people who were all doing quite well in their corporate jobs. And I'd watched them all do presentations. There was maybe 20 of them. Not one of them told a story. Not one of them. It was all about bullet points and about leveraging the value, all that nonsense language that you get indoctrinated with. But of course, they don't teach you at school. It's crazy. They don't teach, the important stuff is not done at school. They don't teach you how to have relationships. They don't. They don't teach you how to read a book. And I think that's my superpower. They don't actually teach you how to read a book at school. And they certainly don't teach you how to tell stories. What's more important than those three things? I can't think of anything.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the recruitment process. We based it on a CV, and we were taught how CVs, and it's all about bullet points. I achieved. Even short sentences. They're not really telling you, I did this and I achieved £50,000 worth of saving, whatever.
That's right.
Let me tell you a story about who I am. Get to know me as a person. Get to know my values. What makes me tick? What makes me happy? What makes me sad? Those are the conversations. You go, actually, I think you're a fantastic person. You'd be great here. We'd love you.
Come and have a job. Come and have a job.
And let's figure out how we can make that work together. And that we never have those conversations. I appreciate hiring at scale isn't very.
It's difficult.
It's hard. Yeah, but for artisans, for specialists, for senior managers, for leaders, we need to have that more story-based. Who are you? Tell me about yourself. Which
become an architect. Sorry.
I mean, telling about yourself again creates problems with people with neurodiversity. Yeah. They're not always well versed in the storytelling art. So we've got to respect different learning styles, different personality types to be able to allow everyone to succeed within a storytelling environment. So it's of course. There's no easy magic bullet, as we've said already.
No, it's complex. So that makes it beautiful. That makes it beautiful for me. That just makes it beautiful.
Yeah.
Complexity is beautiful. Simplicity, it's a bit like, and I won't go on about this, but one of the competencies I really don't like, and I know it's an indicator of someone who is going to have a problem with me, if nothing else, is people who are certain. Certainty is the sign of a fool or a teenager. Yeah. Certainty, it's just such a silly way to be. And that's why, Brené Brown nicked this from the Buddhists. But she talks about, having a soft front, strong back and a soft front and a wild heart, the bit she added. But that's what that meant. It means that a soft front means you take in, you don't have a hard front, the armor, like the certainty thing.
I agree.
And it's beautiful when you think about it, but people don't get it. Companies think, I need somebody who's dead sure, and they need to know what they're doing. That's how we got the Scottish Parliament building, or the O2, or they call them black swans. That's because people were certain about what they were doing, rather than actually being open to feedback and changing what they were doing. But I won't go on, Joe, because I'm quite passionate about that subject.
That's another hour we can have. It's a question I like, which is strong opinions lightly held. Yeah. So it means you can have a viewpoint, you do know what you stand for, but lightly held means you're able to embrace other people's and maybe adjust your own and recontextualize it or accept other perspectives. So I think I like
change your mind.
Your soft front, strong back type. Yeah, I love this content as well. Anything that says I want to speak to somebody who has an opinion, but I'd like to think that between us we can come up at a third opinion, bit of yours, bit of mine, and a shared one. And that's I think the basis of all storytelling and human interaction is to come up with a third view, which is amalgamation of both of you.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, I think we yacked on now for well over an hour, and that's been fantastic. So how can our listeners and our viewers find you? So you've got hashtags, and what's a good way of finding?
Well, my main hashtag that I use everywhere is slightly narcissistic, but it's Scott Speaks. And if you use that on LinkedIn or on Instagram or on YouTube, you'll find me. My YouTube is called the Employee Experience, which is full of mini documentaries and little what I call talk trailers for what Scott speaks about. Otherwise, I'm obviously on LinkedIn, but my favourite platform, and the one that I think is misunderstood, is Twitter. Because Twitter is about information. It's not about your family or your job. It's about information. And if you use it well, I think it's still a lovely platform. So at Scott_MacArthur is where I can be found most of the time. And I'm very proud of how I curate my Twitter stream. And a lot of the detail there disagrees with what I say. Because again, I think you should be giving balance to people. And don't think that all my stuff is certain, because it certainly isn't.
Fantastic. And if anyone would like to find out more about the Whole Man Academy, whether you're a woman listening, a man listening, or someone who identifies as non-binary or other genders, then again, contact you. Is it hashtag All Man Academy as well? It
is, hashtag All Man Academy, and it's wholemanacademy.com. And we have a newsletter which is open to everybody. We're about to make a big announcement about a podcast. It's coming soon. We're starting recording that in the next couple of weeks. That'll be a bi-weekly podcast. So that's all coming in the next few weeks.
Well, Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate our time together, and I really look forward to catching up with you face to face again and just carrying on this conversation. In fact, what we should
Absolutely,
do is set up a webcam next time we have a pint and keep recording.
Do you know, that's a great idea? Yeah, okay. Let's be in each other's pubs, but on the webcam. That's a great idea. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you for listening. Please do subscribe to keep updated with future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES, Bites. I have a number of exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be inspired by over the next few weeks and months. And if you would love to take part, please do let me know. I'm looking for other people to just have a chat with Joe and inspire the audience. So thank you very much. Catch you all next week. See you later. Bye.